How's it going, everybody? In this mini lecture video, we are going to be talking about synthesis, which is in a lot of ways kind of a fancy way to talk about making connections between our sources. Before we get into what exactly synthesis is and how this applies to your writing, I want to take a moment and practice doing it before you even really kind of get a sense of what it is. So I want us to focus on this question of what makes an effective movie or TV monster. And so the next slide that I'm going to show in this video has images of 9 movie and TV monsters. They've had varying degrees of impact. Some of them you might already know and love and be familiar with. Some of them, this might be your first time hearing about them. What's important is the fact that at one point or another, they've made an appearance on screens all over the world. In the description of this video, I will also be providing some monster identifications so that in case you haven't seen any of these movies or are unfamiliar with any of these monsters, you'll be able to learn a little bit more about them. Now, what I would like for you to do, and what I think you should do, is when we get to that next slide, pause the video for a minute and try to put the monsters that I've shown you that I have here into groups based on their characteristics. So you might put them into groups based on like what do they look like, who or what do they prey upon, are they scary, are they not scary, why or why not. And then after that, we'll talk about why we were doing this. So I'm going to click over to the next slide. And here you'll see we have our 9 movie or TV monsters. Now, pause the slide or pause the video for a minute and try to put these into groups, again, based on, are they scary? Are they not scary? What do they look like? What do they prey upon? And any other kinds of categories that you want to create for them. Again, check the description below for some like monster identification, just in case you're unfamiliar with who or what any of these movie monsters are. I will talk a little bit more in just a moment about maybe some ways that you could group these together. Okay, so moving on, here are a couple of ways that students in the past have put these monsters into categories. So they looked at, like, do they prey on children? And some folks said, okay, well, clearly Freddy Kreuger and the Pale Man and Sulley do. Does the Cookie Monster also maybe prey on children? At least targeted towards children. I don't know. We could think about that. On the very, very basic sense of things, we have some monsters have fluffy blue fur. Some are serial killers like Patrick Bateman, Eileen Wuornos, and Freddy Kreuger. We have sort of these vengeful killers in Freddy and Eileen Wuornos. We have supernatural entities like Frankenstein's monster, the Pale Man, Dracula, and Freddy Kreuger. We have the real or the realistic ones, like the shark from Jaws, Patrick Bateman, and Eileen Wuornos. We have like these older classic film monsters like Frankenstein's monster or Dracula. We have the ones that are geared towards kids or that are friendly or they're less scary, like Sulley and the Cookie Monster, where they look terrifying, such as Freddy or the Pale Man. Now, you might be asking, well, why are we talking about movie monsters? Well, these groupings, what we are doing is we're trying to answer that question. What traits make an effective movie monster? And all of these movie and TV monsters, all 9 of them, are an attempt at creating an effective movie or TV monster. And we're trying to come up with an idea, an argument, a claim about what traits do effective movie and TV monsters have. So we're looking at sources. We're looking at monsters that already exist, and we're trying to make connections between them. And we found out that sometimes they prey on children. Sometimes they have fluffy blue fur. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that can or do or might actually exist in our world, like sharks and serial killers. We have these kind of enduring myths, like vampires and reanimated corpses in Dracula and Frankenstein's monster. All of these things are claims to be made about what makes an effective movie or a TV monster. These are traits that they have, traits that they share. And we're making connections between these various sources. And that's really what synthesis is drawing and taking these things that might not on their surface seem connected and making connections between them. In short, synthesis is using two or more sources to back up a particular claim. And using these synthesis words or phrases to establish a relationship between your sources. So you might say, that they agree or they disagree, they concur, they expound upon, go further, contradict, confirm, clarify, whatever. An overly simplified model of what synthesis looks like in writing is A author writes X thing, B author agrees and writes Y thing. So to go back to our effective traits, Freddy Kreuger preys on children. The Pale Man, also like Freddy Kreuger, also preys on children. In this sense, Freddy and the Pale Man are agreeing with one another. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. This is, in a lot of ways, this is an example of this theory. It was developed by a guy named Kenneth Burke in his book, The Philosophy of Literary Form, called the Berkey and Parlor. And it's a metaphor for doing academic research and for doing academic writing. Burke writes, imagine that you enter a parlor. And, if you haven't been in a parlor before, you might think of it as a coffee shop or a restaurant or a bar or, anywhere where people are gathered together and they're talking about something. You come late. When you arrive, others have long preceded you, and they're engaged in a heated discussion. A discussion too heated for them to pause and tell you exactly what it's about. In fact, the discussion had already begun long before any of them got there, so that no one present is qualified to retrace for you all of the steps that had gone before. You listen for a while until you decide that you've caught the tenor of the argument, and then you put in your oar. Someone answers. You answer him. Another comes to your defense. Another aligns himself against you, to either the embarrassment or gratification of your opponent, depending upon the quality of your ally's assistance. However, the discussion is interminable. The hour grows late. You must depart, and you do depart, with the discussion still vigorously in progress. So let's think about this in terms of the movie Monsters. If we were a bunch of Hollywood executives and we were looking to come up with the next big movie monster, what would we need to do? Well, we would need to do our research. And we would need to watch a ton of monster movies. And we would have to identify what are some of the effective traits, or what are some of the traits of effective movie monsters? What do they eat? What do they look like? What do they prey upon? Are they realistic? Are they, fantastical? And we would have to make these connections between these various movie monsters before we could then come forth and make our own new movie monster. In a lot of ways, that is what you are doing when you are performing synthesis. You walk into this parlor, you walk into this conversation about whatever topic it is that you are thinking about, that you're researching, that you're writing about. This could be the topic of what makes an effective movie monster. This could be the conversation of what makes something good writing, or what makes someone a good writer. Lots of people have written a lot of things about these topics. This is the conversation, this is the parlor that you are entering when you begin to do research. What you have to do is sit and read and do the research. You have to listen to that conversation, listen to what other people have said and are saying. And then once you have done that, then you can start making those connections, seeing and finding similarities between people who are talking about the same thing, figuring out where they agree and disagree with one another, figuring out who you agree or disagree with, and making those connections. And then you make your own contribution. Then you make your own argument. Now, synthesis is also not a couple of things. Synthesis is not just having two or more sources in the same paragraph, and that's it. It really involves establishing relationships between your sources, thinking about those synthesis verbs. Does something agree or disagree, or expand upon, or explain, or complicate? It's not one source that only agrees to or with itself. This is especially true when you see authors quoting other authors. It's easy to make it look like we're using more than one source, but if it's all coming from the same essay or article or chapter, then it's not really synthesis, because that writer has already made the connections for you. Synthesis isn't just random synthesis words thrown in to create the illusion of synthesis. If we say that one author agrees with another author, we really want to make sure that, well, they actually do agree with one another. Otherwise, it's not really doing what we say that it's doing. It's the same thing with painting false relationships between sources. Again, if two sources do actually align with one another, then that's good. We want to say that they agree. But if they're not really connected at all, then we don't want to draw those relationships where they don't exist. We also don't want to do so much synthesis that we lose our own voice. Synthesis is a process of making those connections so that you can show that you understand the complexity of a topic before you make your own points. But you don't want to also lose your own voice and not make any of your own points. And we also, just like when we're talking in real life, we don't want to let one person dominate the conversation. So we don't want to use one source so much that it does a disservice to the rest of our sources. So how can you improve the synthesis the connections that you're making? A couple of questions that you can ask yourself when you're thinking about the relationships between your sources. Have you made that relationship clear? Have you used one of those synthesis words? And are they used to link two or more different sources? Does that synthesis word or phrase accurately summarize the relationship between or among the sources? Does that synthesized material overwhelm your voice? And is one source synthesized or otherwise used more than the other sources on your Works Cited page? So I hope this has been helpful, and synthesis really is at the heart of academic writing, making those connections between our sources so that we can then make our own unique contributions to the conversation. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you in the next video.